Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee's second meeting of 2021. Our first item today is to decide whether to take item 8 in private, and that is consideration of our draft response to the House of Lords Common Frameworks Committee's inquiry into post-Brexit common frameworks. Our members agreed. We are agreed. Thank you. Our second item on our agenda is to take evidence on the Land Reform Scotland Act 2016, Register of Persons Holding a Controlled Interest in Land Regulations 2020, from the Minister and his officials. And I welcome Ben Macpherson, Minister for Rural Affairs and the Natural Environment, in what is his first appearance in front of the committee. And the Minister is joined by Fiona Taylor, Head of Land Use and Land Reform, Robin Cornwall, Senior Policy Officer, and Kirsty Slee, lawyer for the Scottish Government. Good afternoon to you all, and good afternoon, Minister. Welcome to your new post. We're very pleased to be the first people to host you. As a number of members have some questions on the Register for Controls Interest in Land, which you'll know we did a report on and we did quite a lot of scrutiny on. So I'd like to hand over first of all to Finlay Carson. Finlay. Not sure if we've got Finlay. Can I go to Mark Ruskell first then, and we'll come back to Finlay once he's back on board. Mark.
Yeah, thanks, convener, and to your portfolio. I wanted to ask you just a couple of questions about the public accessibility of this new register. I mean, you've seen through the evidence that we've taken that you know, there's a real desire out there for people to get access to this information. I think that's probably only intensified actually since lockdown, as more people spend more time in their communities and are becoming more aware of land reform and ownership issues. We did take evidence, and the Registers of Scotland indicated that there would be user testing taking place to look at how this register could be incorporated into the ScotLIST system. However, when the committee wrote back to you, we didn't get any further information on that. So I'm interested to know how this register will integrate fully into the ScotLIST system, and what kind of user testing has been undertaken at this point on that.
Shall I come in, convener?
Yes, carry on, Minister.
Thank you, and thank you to Mark Ruskell for his question. The system, the register rather within the system, will be integrated with the other registers at Registers of Scotland and accessible as part of the ScotLIST system. So it will be fully available to members of the public in the same way, and also integrated with the current registers that are held. And to the extent possible, there will also be integration with regard to other registers held at Companies House in terms of a company law perspective. But I would be grateful if officials could also elaborate on that, and please give Mr. Ruskell any feedback on the testing that's taken place.
Well, yeah, I can come in on that. I suppose the first thing to say is Registers of Scotland are at sort of very early stages in developing the system to not preempt the parliamentary process. So they have began initial sort of scoping, but as far as I'm aware, they've not started specific testing with individuals as of yet, but they will do very, very soon. And as the Minister has said, it will be fully incorporated into ScotLIST. So the same portal that they obviously use to access the land register. And in terms of accessibility, all the information on this register will be completely free to access as well.
Right.
Mark, does that clarify?
When do you expect this? I want to come in on just a related supplementary. That's okay. So when do you expect this to be live then? Because we have been waiting for this for a long time. The initial consultation was 2016. when do we expect for our constituents, a fully live, functional, intuitive system where you can just go on and you can find out the information that you need, and it's integrated between all these different registers and sources of information? When's the go live on this?
So we collectively want this implemented as quickly as possible, and I'm aware that, of course, that the committee very appropriately and gratefully accepted the Cabinet Secretary's position that this implementation should be delayed because of the pandemic. But we're now in a situation where we want to pass these regulations today, and that will provide for a 12-month transitional period. So the duties that are implied and required as a result of these regulations will commence on the 1st of April 2022, and then the offences provisions from the 1st of April 2023. And this is to give people sufficient time to comply with the regulations, and also for registers Scotland, who are of course accountable to Parliament, to implement the necessary systematic changes in IT updates in order to be able to deliver this in the manner that Ms Ruskell and all of our constituents wish to see. I should say from my previous portfolio that the way that Registers of Scotland have responded to the pandemic, I know, has been remarkably proficient, and the service that they've been able to continue to provide and the progress that they've been able to make on a number of their responsibilities has been significantly positive and constructive, and I would expect them as an established and well-running institution to take forward the implementation of these regulations as efficiently as possible and within the timescales set in the regulations. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks. Can I just ask one more question, and it's about the alignment with the 2018 EU money laundering directive. Are you 100% sure that these regulations align with that directive?
Well, I will allow officials to come in on that shortly, but of course the way that the regulations have been designed is in order to incorporate both particularly any Westminster changes, and of course there is proposed further company law legislation at Westminster in order to make sure that this new register gives the most effective and comprehensive analysis and set of information for the public to create that transparency, because of course that is the essence behind the Act and behind the regulations before us today, as possible. I'd be grateful if officials could come in from the EU directive perspective that Mr Ruskell raises in particular.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. We are content that they do comply with that. I don't know if my colleagues have anything they want to add on that, but
on the record.
Okay, that's fine. Just we are having a difficulty getting Finlay Carson back, but I do know what he was going to ask, and I'll just ask it on his behalf. The committee understands that ScotList has 2 tiers of access: open public access and the registered users access. We'd welcome an explanation as to what access that gives you for both tiers. That was the thrust of Finlay's questions, and then I have a follow-up on the back of that, Minister.
Can you come in having liaised with registers on the more technical side of the implementation and ScotList?
yes, in terms of the 2 tiers of access, currently I believe the 3 access gives you access to the actual what the boundaries of a specific title number are and the last sale price of that property. And for additional access in terms of who owns the property, outstanding charges, there's a fee of around £3 currently, I think. And I think that was reduced quite drastically in the last year from around £30 to £3. all the information on this register, just to reiterate, will be completely free of charge to access for the public. So there won't be 2 tiers of access for any of the information held on this register.
So that's a change from the existence. So if there won't be 2 tiers anymore, everyone will just have free access to everything. Is that what you're saying?
No, not to the land register data. All
right.
the information that this register will hold will be completely free.
Right, okay, but for the registered access, for the enhanced information, there will be a fee of £3. Is that per search?
As far as I'm aware, I think I'd have to double check with Registers of Scotland, but I think it is per search, yes.
The other thing that Finlay Carson wanted to ask was we were asking about if there was a view on the need to have a Scottish registered address in order to register interest in land, and actually and that was something that we didn't get a response back from you on, Minister. So I wonder if you've got information on what you're doing there. Are you requiring people to have a registered Scottish address?
So just on the last question for clarity, so the register that we're talking about today will be free. The charges, which as have been articulated previously by officials, have been significantly reduced, and that is for accessing searches on the land register. So interrelated but different aspects of registers. In terms of a fixed Scottish address, in terms of controlled interest, the recording on this register will be all of those who, within the stipulations of the regulations, have a controlling interest, whether they're in Scotland or overseas entries. But I'll again let Robin come in on the detail of that particular point and its relation with the purchase of property and ownership of property more generally in Scotland.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just to follow on from what the Minister said, there's no requirement within the regulations to provide an address that's based within Scotland. It's just an address that the person can be contactable at is the key thing. It may be, in hindsight, people who are based overseas may decide to use a solicitor's address, for example, something like that. But yeah, there's nothing specific within the regulations to mean they have to provide an address in Scotland.
And of course, overseas legal entities who own or tenant land under a long lease of 20 plus years, the concerns are that they can frequently be opaque, and it can be hard to identify who actually control the decision-making of the entity in relation to land it owns. So that's one of the aspects that this register is, of course, addressing, and the definitions therein and the construction of the regulations before us will enable us to have greater understanding of who sits behind those entities.
Thank you. We may, if we can't get Finlay back, because I know that he'll probably want to follow up on a couple of those answers, we may suspend briefly. But before we do that, give him a chance to get back onboarded behind the scenes. I'll take questions from Claudia Beamish, and hopefully Finn will rejoin. If he hasn't, we'll suspend the meeting to get him back. Claudia.
Thank you very much, Convener, and welcome, Minister, to your first session with us as the Eclair Committee. I'd like to follow up on another aspect of this that you touched on very briefly. You mentioned the offences issue in your earlier. Our convener, Gillian Martin, wrote to the Cabinet Secretary about this and the concerns about parity between the fines related to this register, the maximum fines, I should say, and comparable offences and breaches on other registers. And as you'll know, those are at £10,000, and there were a number of stakeholders, including Community Land Scotland, who felt that the lower rate for this register of £5,000 was not adequate as a deterrent, possibly. And so in response, the Cabinet Secretary actually wrote at point 48, saying that, at 49, that there's no indication of an intention to review the 2016 Land Reform Act in respect to this. And while I understand that in the pandemic, I wonder if you could clarify for us whether there would be an intention in the future to make sure that there are similar sanctions for similar breaches, irrespective of which register the information is held on. Thank you.
Minister?
Thank you. Thank you, Convener, and to Claudia Beamish for that question. So, as you alluded to in your question, the criminal penalties that we have included within these regulations are the maximum permitted under the 2016 Act. This maximum could in future be amended in the next Parliament or in a future Parliament through secondary legislation under Section 39(6) of the 2016 Act to enable an increase in penalties. However, we consider within the regulations before us today that a criminal penalty is a significant deterrent in itself towards non-compliance, and that the size of fine is appropriate and proportionate. This is because penalties for crimes must be commensurate to the crime, not to the offender. We cannot raise the penalty just because certain offenders may be wealthy enough, for example, that only a high penalty will have a deterrent value in that sense. So we must proceed on the basis that most people seek to comply with the law because criminal offences are for the purpose in themselves of deterring those who might intend otherwise. So I think the overall what we're proposing today is proportionate and appropriate, and if Parliament wanted to, or the committee wanted to revisit the question in future years, that would be for decisions at that time. But at the moment, we think what is proposed is appropriate and correct.
Right, thank you. I simply wanted to highlight that point, Minister, as stakeholders had highlighted it to us, and I actually tend to agree with it, but there we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, we don't seem to have been able to get Finlay Carson back while we've been live on the air, so I am going to suspend this meeting briefly to allow him to come. Right, we appear to have sorted out the technical issues with Finlay Carson's connection. And Finlay, I'm not sure if you heard the Minister's responses to the questions I asked on your behalf. It might be worth you. I mean, this is legislation, the regulations we're voting on, so I think it's important that you get your chance to scrutinise them. Would you like to go over them again with the Minister and iron out any areas that you need answers on? Can you hear me? Okay, we're having a little bit of difficulty hearing you, so we'll just allow broadcasting to try and sort that out. I can see your microphone is muted, but we'll just see if broadcasting can deal with that. No, it's not looking very good. Maybe if someone can give me an indication if Finlay's still in the broadcast, might have to move on. Yeah, he has dropped out of the meeting again. Minister, I mean, while we're waiting for Finlay to rejoin and if we can get him back, was there anything, I'm very aware that I didn't allow you to make any opening remarks, and that's on me. You might want to draw members' attention to some of the things that you wanted to say about the regulations in general while we're waiting for Finlay to come back. Minister.
Thank you, Convener. I could proceed through the opening statement that I intended to make, if that would be helpful for the committee.
It would be helpful. I should have allowed you to do that in the first place, so apologies for that. If you just want to give your statement, and then if members have got any other questions, they can come in, and if not, we'll move on if we can't get Finlay back.
Okay, thank you, Convener. So the regulations, if approved by Parliament, as members know, will bring into force Part 3 of the Land Reform Scotland Act 2016, which provides that Scottish ministers must make regulations requiring information to be provided about persons who have controlling interests in owners and tenants of land, and about the publication of that information in a public register kept by the Keeper of the Registers of Scotland. The duties in the regulations will commence, as I said previously, on the 1st of April 2022, which will be the date that the new register will become operational. The purpose of the new register is to improve public transparency about land ownership, and it will achieve this by making information about those who have a controlling interest in land publicly available. In other words, those who ultimately make the decisions about the land management or use of land, even if they are not necessarily registered or recorded as the owner of the land. There can no longer be categories of landowner or tenant where intentionally or otherwise control of decision making is obscured. In conjunction with other transparency regimes, this means that it will be possible to look behind every category of entity in Scotland, including overseas entities and trusts, to see who controls land. We do not require double reporting for entities subject to other regimes, as we do not want to duplicate existing publicly available information. A further key purpose of the register is to enable communities and individuals, as Mark Ruskell alluded to engage with people making decisions about land that affect them by making it easier to identify the decision makers. The regulations will also aid policy making by enabling a fuller picture of those individuals who have control over decisions about land in Scotland. The Scottish Government consultation on the policy proposals for a new register ran from September to December 2016, and a further consultation after the publication of the proposed draft regulations for a new register was carried out from June to November 2018. And we have analysed consultation responses, engaged widely with relevant stakeholders, as the committee have, and listened to the committee's views throughout the process. The final laying of these regulations at this time marks a significant step towards delivering greater transparency of land ownership in Scotland. This will put Scotland at the forefront in Europe and deliver greater transparency than any other part of the UK. And I'm also particularly pleased that access to the new register will be free to the public, as emphasised earlier. While some have wanted the register to include beneficial interests, its purpose is to provide transparency of who controls and makes decisions about land in Scotland in order to increase and promote constructive engagement. This purpose is different to wider UK regimes which aim to combat illegal activities such as money laundering. The UK Government have also signified a desire to introduce a draft registration of overseas entities bill, which we support, which would establish a new beneficial ownership register of overseas entities that own UK property. We are engaging closely with the UK Government and counterparts as this develops, particularly as it would require a legislative consent motion from the Scottish Parliament. We have no firm timescales from the UK Government and expect that the bill will be introduced when UK parliamentary time allows. Therefore, the regulations that we have laid take account of overseas legal entities. This approach maintains flexibility should the UK Government proposals be delayed or not be suitable for our purposes. So as I said before, we support it in general terms, but obviously we'll have to look at what the UK Government brings forward. In terms of substantive changes to the regulations since the second laying, we have added a provision to ensure that the Keeper must provide Scottish ministers with such information ministers may require in order to monitor the efficacy of the register, and this will allow Scottish ministers to scrutinise and analyse the data from the register in a robust fashion to ensure that the policy aims are being met and that the right outcomes are being delivered. The affirmative regulations that are before you have been subject to an enhanced affirmative procedure as set out in the Land Reform Scotland Act 2016, and this is in fact the third time that the committee have scrutinised these regulations. The regulations have been complex and technically challenging, and I would like to take this opportunity to formally thank the committee and your clerks for your robust scrutiny and attention to detail, as well as all the stakeholders for being actively engaged in the development of these regulations. And I'm happy to answer any further questions that you or other members may have, Convener. Thank you.
So all our members have asked everything they want of you apart from Finlay Carson. So I am going to give it another try. We have Finlay back in the broadcast. And Finlay, can I come to you and we'll give it one more try. And if we can't get you on the record, we might have to follow up. You can follow up with your questions to the Minister, but we will proceed to the motion. Finlay.
Can you hear me, Convener?
Yes, we can.
I hope you can hear me. Okay, I haven't heard any of the previous discussions. My concerns were around that Scotland currently has 2 tiers of access, open registered user access. We did ask for further information from the Scottish Government, however that information hasn't been provided. Can you give us assurances that the 2 levels of access will give people the level of information that they're looking for? And also a simple question on the Scottish Government providing their view on whether address should be available in.
So for the benefit of Finlay, Robin, I believe you took us through that when I asked those questions. So if you could go through that again for the benefit of Mr. Carson, please. Very grateful.
Yeah, so as I said before, Scotland is the main system that ROS used to provide access to the two property registers, the Land Register and the Register of Saisines. Information about the Land Register, you can get a snapshot of the cadastral map, and the last sale price is available for free. There is a £3 fee for the citizen to access what's called the title sheet, which will give you any rights, burdens, charges, the actual owner of the Land Register title. The information held on this register will be completely free of charge. But there will still be the £3 fee to access the enhanced information on the Land Register.
And the point on the Scotland addresses? I think, Minister, you covered that?
Yes, just on the first point there, I think it's important to emphasise that what's available publicly on ScotLists in terms of the land register, most of the content of the land register is still available. It is available free, as this register will be. It is the access to title sheets in the land register that incurs the fine, the fee rather of £3, and of course that has been reduced by 90% from £30 in recent. In terms of the point so I just think it's worth emphasising that most information in the land register is free to access, as will this register that we're discussing today. In terms of the point that Mr. Carson raised around whether a Scottish address is required, as stated earlier, this is not the position.
Okay, right. We are now going to move on to invite the Minister to move motion S5M 23896 that the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee recommends that the Land Reform Scotland Act 2016 registered persons holding a controlled interest in land regulations 2020 be approved. Can I ask the Minister to move the motion?
Formally moved, Convener. Thank you.
I now invite members to comment. I'll have a look in the chat box to see if anybody wishes to comment. Seeing anyone? If you have nothing to say at this point, ask the Minister if there's anything that he wants to say to wind up.
Just urge the committee to pass the regulations and look forward to working together on this, as I think it's something we all want to see implemented and taken forward successfully. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Minister. The question then is that motion S5M 2386 in the name of Rosanna Cunningham be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Right. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence on the animal welfare licensing of activities involving Animal Scotland Regulations 2021 from the Minister and his officials. We have the Minister staying with us, and he is now joined by Andrew Vost, the Veterinary Head of Animal Welfare, John Nicholson, the Senior Policy Manager of the Animal Welfare Team, and Grant McClarty, lawyer for the Scottish Government. And I believe the Minister has an opening statement. Minister.
Thank you, Convener, and I'm very glad to appear before the committee to discuss the draft licensing regulations, the delivery of which is a programme for government commitment. The Scottish Government takes animal welfare very seriously, as the committee knows, and we are committed to the highest possible standards. That is why we established the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission to ensure that future policy on animal welfare is informed by independent and expert advice. It's also why we brought forward the Animals and Welfare Act, which increases the maximum available penalties for the most serious animal welfare and wildlife crimes, as well as offering other protections for animals. These regulations before us today represent another important milestone in our work to enhance and safeguard the welfare of animals in Scotland. They provide a robust and modern risk-based framework for the licensing of certain activities involving animals. And the intention is for that framework to develop further in the future to cover a wider range of other activities involving animals. That's an important point. The regulations replace existing legislation covering dog breeding and pet sales that is outdated and no longer fit for purpose. And subject to meeting the criteria for licensing, the regulations also require cat and rabbit breeders, operators of animal welfare establishments, e.g. animal sanctuaries and rehoming centres, and those actively sourcing animals either from within Scotland or elsewhere with a view to rehoming them as pets in Scotland to all be licensed. The licensing of these particular activities will deliver much needed accountability and transparency and ensure that those engaged in such activities operate to high standards of animal welfare. Importantly, they will also provide reassurance to everyone who cares about the provenance of pet animals and want to feel confident that the pet they buy for their family, for themselves, has had the best start in life, and it and its family have been treated and cared for appropriately. The licensing regulations also include provision to prohibit anyone selling pets in the course of a business from selling puppies and kittens sourced from third parties, an activity that has become increasingly linked to the unlicensed puppy trade. And this delivers on another programme for government commitment to introduce the so-called Lucy's Law in Scotland, and that is an important step forward in our ambition to limit the abuse of animals. As we promised to do, the regulations deliver one of the key proposals in Chris Graham's proposed Members' Bill on responsible breeding and ownership of dogs. In particular, these regulations will require anyone breeding 3 or more litters of puppies in a 12-month period to be licensed, subject to limited exceptions. For context and awareness, existing legislation refers to 5 or more litters. Convener, lastly, I want to acknowledge the contribution made to the development of these new pet selling provisions by Jeremy Balfour MSP. As I'm sure the committee is aware, Mr Balfour undertook a significant amount of work, including public consultation, as part of his proposed Members' Bill, which sought to modernise and strengthen the existing licensing provisions set out in the Pet Animals Act 1951. The proposals in Mr Balfour's bill accorded fully with those of the Scottish Government, that being to bring forward a modern and flexible licensing framework to further improve the welfare of animals in Scotland. And so I'm delighted that we have been able to incorporate and deliver his bill's provisions in our new licensing regulation. I hope the committee will agree that these new licensing regulations represent a further significant step forward in animal welfare in Scotland, and I'm happy to answer any questions that members may now have.
Thank you, Minister. And we do have some questions. The first one from Liz Smith.
Thank you, Convener. And I think it's appropriate to put on record in this committee the thanks of my colleague Jeremy Balfour for the work that the Scottish Government has done. He's very much appreciative of everything that has taken place during the consultation stages and drawing up the proposals. The one question that he did have, and I'd like to ask just now, is that he believes that an awful lot of this will be about the guidance. In other words, it's very important to have the right guidance so that everybody is aware of exactly what is should be happening. And he wondered about that guidance. What is the process for publishing it, and what is the timescale?
Minister.
Thank you. Absolutely. As Liz Smith has detailed, detailed accompanying guidance will be developed over the next few months, and that will be in close collaboration with both key stakeholders and enforcement bodies before the proposed coming into force date in September. So the time frame for constructing that guidance and making sure that the appropriate collaboration and engagement takes place is between, subject to the committee and Parliament passing the regulations, of course, is between now and the coming into force date of the regulations in September. And that is when the guidance will be developed. I would be grateful if Andrew Voss could come in and say something more about that, please.
Yes, well, as the Minister says, we obviously have been working closely with stakeholders in drafting the regulations, and it was always clear that there would be a certain amount of guidance needed, and there are some quite technical specifications in the regulations, so there are clearly things that will need accompanying guidance, and we are well engaged with the stakeholders. We have been in developing the regulations. We'll carry on that engagement and develop the detailed guidance that will be necessary to cover the different aspects of these regulations.
Liz, would you like to follow up?
Yes. Yes. Could I just come back in? That's very helpful. Thank you. Could I just ask, obviously, with an impending election and the timescale is really quite tight, and are you confident that you'll be able to engage sufficiently with stakeholders and with enforcers during that time period? Because it's not really that far away to September. Mr. Balfour just wanted clarification on whether you're confident that all that can be taken up quite quickly.
Andrew Ross, I'd be grateful if you could confirm that to the member, given that you've had the direct engagement with stakeholders and enforcers in recent weeks.
Yes, I mean, we have been quite clear with the stakeholders that this is very much ongoing work, and as soon as we've hopefully had the regulations approved, we'll be going directly onto that. So we have a member of staff who will be taking that work forwards as quickly as possible. So we are certainly committed to doing this over the next few months. And obviously that work can go ahead, despite the imminent election and political developments. That doesn't stop us talking to stakeholders as officials and developing the fairly detailed technical guidance that we will need. And so we are committed to doing that, and possibly leading on to maybe training events as we get into the summer, nearer the time of implementation. We may be able to develop some of that guidance and present it to the enforcement authorities in the form of training, or helping out with training events that the local authorities may be organising themselves.
Now, I would supplement that by saying that as providing Parliament passes the regulations, which I urge it to do, I will, of course, as Minister, take forward progressing the preparation of that guidance with officials with the diligence and commitment, as I'm sure you would expect.
Thank you.
Certainly, your predecessor will remember this, Minister, and Andrew Voss will remember that one of the things that we flagged up was the issue of when people have been convicted of animal welfare offences in one area, they may move, and the local authority area that they're in might not have a record. And we asked for the government to give consideration on the development of one sort of central database, so that no matter where somebody was in Scotland, they would be able to be checked up on if they were purchasing animals or owning animals at all. Has the government given this consideration?
A very important point, and one that speaks to also how do we digitally, as we move forward in the post-coronavirus era in particular, that we have that greater integration of services. And of course, the Scottish Government is publishing a digital strategy shortly to help progress that work in the round. But in terms of the area of animal welfare, the regulations before us today, as the committee will be aware, do not specifically address this sharing of information. They do not specifically address the need for better information sharing between local authorities and other enforcement bodies. But better information sharing in that regard is absolutely recognised by the Scottish Government and is being taken forward separately. There are ongoing discussions about standardising the databases that local authorities use to record information about animal welfare and related investigations, and how relevant information can be more efficiently shared with Scottish SPCA, APHA and Food Standards Scotland investigators, while at the same time complying with the necessary data protection legislation. Police Scotland have a central record of convictions and can supply information to other enforcement authorities when requested for legitimate reasons. So that's already there. And the Animals and Welfare Act requires a report to be produced within the next 5 years on the steps that have been taken or are being taken to ensure sharing of information on persons who have been issued with a fixed penalty notice or convicted of offences under animal health, welfare and wildlife crime legislation, including offences where a disqualification order has been issued. So this is something we will certainly be taking forward in future. It is an issue that we, like the committee, see as an area that needs attention. and I hope this answer gives the committee the assurance that while it's not addressed in these regulations, it is a matter of real concern that we are focused on improving, along with local authorities and other agencies.
It's good to hear that that's been actively worked on. I'm going to go to Mark Ruskell, who has some questions.
Vina. And yeah, it's good to hear the answer to that last question. I think it does need to be seamless. Can I just ask about the timing of bringing forward these regulations? And obviously, you've had the several members' bills, being animal sentencing bill as well. But I'm just thinking about the UK Act was brought in 2018. Why has it taken so long to bring these provisions into Scots law?
I can't speak for the period behind us. All I would say is that as I said, this is an area as a whole that the Scottish Government sees a priority, and I'm keen to see these regulations before us passed today and thereafter taken forward by Parliament, and for us to move as expediently but also diligently as we can with the coming into force date in September. And see the implementation of these regulations thereafter. Andrew, I don't know if you want to come in with any further details that might be of interest to Mr. Ruskell.
Yes, I can do. And obviously we are introducing some completely new elements, so licensing of animal rescue centres and rehoming activities, and licensing of cat and rabbit breeding are things that aren't being done in the UK, so we have those are new initiatives. In terms of why it's taken so long, and we did say we would be introducing licensing of animal rescue centres a few years ago. I mean, obviously in the intervening time, we have had the huge pressures of EU exit, as well as developing our animals and wildlife bill. So inevitably we can't do everything we would like to do as quickly as we would like to do, but we are, we have taken it forwards at a time of probably unprecedented pressure in terms of other work, so we are doing reasonably well. One of the criticisms in England has actually been they were trying to do too much too quickly, and they introduced a lot of new detailed requirements which local authorities maybe felt they didn't have time to get to grips with before they were expected to implement it. So there can occasionally be some advantages in learning from other administrations and taking a little bit more time to make sure we get it right, or get it as good as we can in the time that we have available.
Thank you, Andrew. And just Andrew was outlined some of the differences in the regulations in England and what's before us today. And I think an important one to also point out, which is related to the previous question in terms of information, is that the English regulations do not require local authorities to publish information about licences that they have issued, whereas the regulations before us place a duty on licensing authorities to publish a register of licences on their own website, and that such registers will help the public distinguish legitimate licensed operators from those who engaged in the unlicensed trade. So I think, as well as what Andrew Ross just said, there are some improvements. So obviously we want to see greater animal welfare across the whole of the UK, but I think we're well placed with these regulations, having taken them forward through a process of considering how best we can deliver for the needs of Scotland, but also improve on what's currently in force in England, and make these regulations even more appropriately comprehensive and effective.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that explains it. Can I come in again?
Yes, that's great.
I've got a couple of questions, Convener, if that's okay. So just some specifics here. I know another colleague's got an interest in how councils have received these regulations, how they're going to be working with them. But I wanted to ask specifically in relation to that, whether there will be a full cost recovery model for councils in implementing these regulations. And also had a question just about how these regulations relate to those who are effectively rehoming animals from countries outside of Scotland and the UK. Be aware that a number of charities take dogs from countries where the dogs are living on the street, and they try and rehome them here. So I'm interested in how the regulations work, where you've got multiple parties effectively working across international barriers.
Minister?
2 quick ones for you.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, with regard to local authorities, we recognise that local authorities do, of course, already have responsibility for licensing of dog breeding establishments and pet sales, and they have generally welcomed the proposed move to a more modern, flexible, risk-based licensing system that will be easier for them to administer in several respects. There will, however, obviously be additional responsibilities for local authorities, namely licensing of cat and rabbit breeders, animal welfare establishments, and those engaging in rehoming activities. We did have various discussions with local authorities when preparing this legislation, and a particular concern they raised was to avoid rushing through detailed new requirements with insufficient time for them to become familiar with them, as this was reported to be a problem when the licensing regime for animal activities was reviewed, and touching on what we just discussed. Because of this, we have proposed the introduction date of September, and we'll be working closely with local authorities and other stakeholders in developing the necessary guidance, as mentioned previously, on the regulations over the next few months. The Scottish SPCA have also generally offered to assist local authorities if requested with inspections of animal welfare establishments, for example, in specialist knowledge of particular exotic animal species and where that's needed. In terms of the cost element, I would be grateful if Andrew Vose could come in terms of any engagement with local authorities on that, and the international aspect to Mark Ruskell's question, if as to that being relevant.
Yes, happy to cover those points. Regarding the cost recovery, so we are expecting local authorities to recover costs and charge a suitable licence fee to allow them to recover costs. We haven't gone any further than that in the regulations, but that's basically our understanding, that local authorities will be able to charge a licence fee that allows them to recover suitable costs. Regarding the importation of animals from abroad, that was a major concern and a consideration when we were developing the legislation to control animal rescue centres and rehoming activities. So we're well aware of the need to try to control people who don't necessarily have premises in Scotland, but maybe rehoming animals from other premises and often bringing in animals from abroad to place with homes in Scotland. So the new regulations will cover anyone who's doing this, so anyone who's rehoming 5 animals or more in a 12-month period, wherever those animals are coming from. If they're placing them with people in Scotland, they will in future require to be licensed. And so this will allow some control over this sort of activity, because there have been a few concerns raised, as Mark Ruskell probably knows, regarding dogs that may not be suitable for the homes that they're placed with, and then there can be difficulties in dealing with those dogs or possibly returning those dogs if that's appropriate. So the regulations will catch these activities regarding animals imported from abroad.
Okay.
Thank you. And Mark, I'm assuming that you don't want to come back in, and I can move to Finlay Carson. Finlay.
Thank you, convener. I hope you can hear me. Great. I'm quite concerned that we really haven't had very much time to look at this, given the public interest in animal welfare issues. And we also saw last week a piece of standalone legislation regarding animal worrying, sheep worrying. And there was, from many of the animal charities, a call for a consolidation bill to bring together all these animal welfare type offences to make something that was robust. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that. Can I ask Andrew what the cost is likely to be and what he's estimated that to be. We've seen things like the Control of Dogs Act 2010, which was brought in by Christine Graham, being pretty unsuccessful because of lack of publicity and whatever around it, and a lack of capacity within councils. It's all very well giving the councils the power to licence, but do you have any indication of what that licence fee might be?
That question seemed to have been addressed to Andrew Vos, but I'll bring in the Minister after Andrew.
Yeah,
I'll convener. I mean, I think it's. I'll let Andrew come in terms of indications of number split based on precedents. But I would point out that the business and regulatory impact assessment laid with the draft regulations set out a range of likely costs for different licence types, which are based on fee levels already in place for dog breeding and pet selling licences. The cost of obtaining a licence, as has been indicated, will be determined by individual local authorities and may vary from application to application depending on how much time and work is required to process such an application. It is understood, however, that the cost of processing an application, including the undertaking of any inspection associated with the application, should be fully recovered, but must not exceed what is reasonable. So there's a balance to strike for local authorities, and as I said, there are a range of different numbers and potential levels set out in the BRIA. As I said, it must not exceed what is considered reasonable, and this is or should be standard practice. So it's our intention to engage with local authorities in the guidance that any fees must be reasonable and justifiable, and to work with local authorities to get that right in preparing the guidance before September. Andrew, do you want to add anything further on that?
Yeah, I think you beat me to it by referring to the business regulatory impact assessment. So there are some detailed scenarios there, but as you say, there is quite a bit of variance in the ease in which some premises may be inspected by local authorities. And of course, our new regulations introduce the possibility of licensing for 1, 2 or 3 years, which may reduce the cost of licensing if there are premises operating to a high standard or maybe part of a recognised independently verified quality assurance scheme. They could possibly be licensed and with a longer term and with lower costs. I mean, regarding the point about whether this should be part of some wider legislation, I think it is worth knowing that this is secondary licensing legislation, and as the Minister said in the opening address, we see this as very much as the first step towards rolling out this modern, flexible, risk-based licensing system to other areas of animal activity. So that could potentially be things like performing animals or dog walking, training, grooming services, these sort of things in future. So it is part of a forward-looking plan to take forward these improvements into other areas of animal licensing.
Okay, thank you. Right, we don't have any other questions from members. I'm now going to invite the Minister to move motion S5M 23808 that the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee recommends that the animal welfare licensing of activities involving animals Scotland Regulations 2021 be approved. Minister.
Formally moved, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite members to make any comment. If you wish to make a comment, you can put an R in the chat box. Not seeing anyone wishing to make a comment. Right, I'll put the question. But the question
No, wait a minute. I can't.
Finlay, sorry, your R's. Yes, your R's only just come up. Finlay.
Yeah, my apologies. I'm trying to work on an iPhone and dealing with the chat and the video is almost impossible. My only comment is that Whilst the Scottish Conservatives, who I represent, are very much in favour of improved animal welfare, and I've welcomed the latest increases in penalties or whatever, we just feel that this is another example of legislation that, if we'd had time as a committee to look at and scrutinise properly, there would may have been the opportunity to improve the licensing coming forward. But we will be supporting this, but it's just unfortunate we've not had more time to potentially improve the legislation.
Thank you. I'll now put the question. The question is that motion S5M 23808 in the name of Ben McPherson be agreed. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. Thank you. So confirm that the committee will report our decision on the regulations in due course, and we are agreed. I want to thank the Minister and his officials for their time this morning. Apologies for the technical difficulties, but we did get there, so thank you very much. We'll now move on to the 6th item on our agenda, which is consideration of a negative instrument, the Crofting Community Right to Buy, Procedures, Ballots and Forms Scotland. I ask if members have any comments in relation to this instrument. Angus MacDonald.
Yes, thanks, Convener. With regard to this item, I'm obliged to declare that I own both domestic and non-domestic properties in a Crofting township in the Western Isles, but they are on an estate where there is a current buyout attempt and the likelihood of a hostile community buyout. However, I derive no income from any of the properties.
And you wish to make a comment as well in relation to this instrument, Angus?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. It's just to welcome the decluttering with regard to simplifying the procedures and also the bringing into line of the ballot requirements in line with other rights to buy. And also, of course, welcome the provision for community bodies to claim expenses incurred in relation to the ballot. Convener, anything that simplifies the mountain of legislation which surrounds crofting will be welcomed by every single crofting community, I'm sure.
Thank you. And I don't see any other members wishing to make comment, so I can confirm that the committee does not want to make any recommendations in relation to this instrument. Thank you, colleagues. 7th item on our agenda is consideration of the negative instrument, the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Trading Scheme Amendment Order 2020. Are there any members wishing to make any comments in relation to Mark Ruskell?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I mean, this is a long-running saga, isn't it, in relation to the UK ETS, and it's another instrument that's coming forward to put it into place. I suppose my one comment is really, and perhaps a question for the Scottish Government, is about what this scheme is going to look like in the future. It's going to stay aligned with the EU ETS. I suppose the one thing which stood out for me in just looking at this instrument was the proposal, I think, by the UK Government. I'm not sure if it's with the Scottish Government, other devolved administrations, but the proposal by the UK Government to look at the free allocation that's given to the aviation sector, with a potential change in that coming in 2024. I'm interested to know what the Scottish Government's view is on that. I'm interested to know whether there are any potential areas there where the aviation sector could then become unaligned through the EU ETS, and whether there might be any implications in terms of carbon leakage from other countries then coming to the UK, other countries' aviation sectors coming to the UK because of a lower regulatory regime. So, you know, these are concerns that I have right now, and it would be useful, I feel, to get the Scottish Government to reflect on their early views on what a review of the aviation sector free allowances might look like. Thanks.
I think, Mark, that's certainly something we can write to the government about. But in relation to this instrument, I'm not seeing anyone else wanting to make any comment. So can I confirm that the committee does not want to make any recommendations in relation to the instrument, but with the caveat that the issues that Mark has put forward about the ETS scheme in general that we can write to the Scottish Government. Are members agreed? Thank you. Right. The committee will meet tomorrow when it will continue taking evidence on the updated climate change plan, but that concludes the public part of our meeting today. Thank you.